AudiobookHubs that provoke. This book is trying to air some of my views, perhaps uncommon and controversial, about a few issues that we constantly grapple with. All my observations may not be fully and unquestionably right, nor will they be a farce, and completely devoid of merit. Written by Roy T. James. Part 2. Chapter 7 In Defense of Terrorism, Defending the Indefensible. I think terrorism is the most potent problem facing the human race today, barring perhaps AIDS. And it looks like the world is under threat. The constantly increasing presence of this makes it an issue much more urgent than perhaps AIDS. Over and above the fact that there is no known defense against such wanton violence, some society is always there to support each form of terrorism, unlike AIDS, adds to its dreadfulness. Thus, each and every form of terrorism is able to garner the support of some state, making it even more difficult to combat. Of course, there can be precautions, but first, we have to know its cause. Depending on the source of terror, the general idea of the factor that contributes most to the terror varies. Like, if it is red terror, that is economic disparity; if it is religious terror, that is something to do with a faith; and, if it is regional terror, that is some form of oppression. I think we are very happy with an endless list like this, and every time an eruption occurs in our society, we start looking for a cause. And we find something amiss, naturally, in one of the local non-uniformities of the society, notwithstanding the fact that local non-uniformities could be present in any society and those need not, necessarily, lead to anything untoward. We quickly establish that as the cause. A few such reasons are shown here. Does this look right? Of course, it doesn't. One thing interests me. The successful approach we have been following so far in finding answers to all the other problems faced by human society is notable here by its absence. Take, for example, health problems. We know cure for a disease is not the same as symptomatic cure. A doctor's success depends on how well he is able to identify the underlying cause and eliminate it. Successful solving of any problem can be reduced to an exercise of converting the problem to certain general principles, the response to which is known to us. This is true for every profession. Separating the apparent from the real, or identifying the most significant, in a collection of possibilities, is nothing but converting the problem to its abstraction. One's competence level is, in fact, a measure of the capability of forming the true abstract representation. Why haven't we adopted such an approach in the case of terrorism? When we happen to identify a cause and applied whatever medicines we thought is suitable, there should have been some decrease in the severity of terrorism. Otherwise, changes should have been made in our approach, the weapon used to fight against terrorism, till a marked reduction is observed. Of course, in almost all matters, this is our guiding principle. We frequently check whether the path taken is correct or not, it is yielding appropriate results, etc. We then make alterations or corrections to our approach based on such results. Why aren't we following this pattern? Instead, whatever was the reason we could establish as its cause, and whichever was the path chosen for fighting it, we continue following the same approach relentlessly, having no regard to its efficacy. Disregarding all that, let us try to find the real reason behind terrorism. As the first step, let us search for its abstraction. What is the aim of terrorism and what do we achieve by that? What is common between the terrorism of different hues? A little reflection can teach us that terrorism never achieves any results. It only enables the terrorists to express themselves. Such actions are plenty. They can be broadly grouped by a more understandable term: irrational acts. In fact, any act, however irrational, may sometimes result in a beneficial outcome, and that is why we hold them with reverence, except the purely violent, disastrous ones. If we analyze irrational acts further, we can see that all of them are but extreme expressions of some of our basic characters or emotions, and these are almost always recognized. Extremes of inquisitiveness, celebrations, art, craft or music or other welcome facets of human nature gets acknowledged, most of the times to a very great extent, showered handsomely with awards or other forms of recognition. Except when it pertains to violence, that too only where it is directed specifically at us, we applaud these acts. Thus when one acts rationally, Recognition may result only if sufficient care is taken to ensure that A. Nobody is put to disadvantage and B. Nobody benefits disproportionately. Whereas when it comes to irrational acts, recognition is almost always assured. Other than the fact that it is more convenient to act rationally, there is nothing attracting us to the rational. What then is the reason for us to be attracted to the irrational? If it is to happen so, that is, if man is to continue having one's affinity to the irrational, some need of the human life is constantly being met by the irrational. Yes, the need to be occupied always. Concede, even rational acts will serve the purpose of to be occupied, but sooner or later such an act will reach its culmination. A rational act, as we already know, will end in a result. Whereas the irrational ones are a boon to mankind, we can continue to be busy with such an act forever. Also, there might not even be a result to bring the act to its natural conclusion. Thus, the real reason behind terrorism lies in the fact that the irrationality quotient of such an act is fairly high. Terrorists are destined to be fully engaged, and so are those who fight them. Those supporting them as well as those opposing can very well engage in many other peripheral activities related to this, like building up the public mood to support or oppose terrorists, manufacturing historical justifications for their acts, or devising suitable solutions. The path to a cure for terrorism, therefore, should be obvious. And it is a well-defined one too, once we see terrorism as nothing but the irrational form of violence. In fact, violence itself, to a large extent, is but the irrational form of certain harmless physical entertainments, which in normal times, we do enjoy, provide ample avenues for expressing one's desire for the irrational, while focusing on ways to control that desire. One very popular avenue is alcohol, and we heavily discourage it, not realizing its usefulness. Chapter 8: A few basic doubts. Should we discard chemical fertilizers or GM crops, and love everything organic? The ongoing tussle between the organic crop and the contaminated others reminds me of my childhood days in a countryside where I grew up with a good bunch of boys. I was a weak child without the physique and skills necessary to pursue manly diversions like climbing trees. We had a good collection of fruit-bearing trees in our vicinity, whereas my brother, who was only a year older, was of good constitution and adept at such activities. Loitering around with friends, whenever we happened to come across a tree with good fruits, I and my friends, who all were quite comparable in the build, would make an appeal to my brother and his cohorts for a few. My brother with a couple of close buddies would reluctantly agree, climb the tree, pluck some fruits, taste a few, throw down a few less for the waiting crowd and show an unhappy face with loud comments, "The fruits are not ripe enough, wait for a few days." We, of course, used to relish whatever that came on our way and wait for the next visit. The same story will be repeated thereafter, I with my weak friends managing to do with a few unripe ones, the blanket judgment about the unworthy nature of fruits refraining us from further attempts till subsequent visits. It took some time for me to realize that this is a perfect plan for the climbers to relish and enjoy the fruits for many days to come, without having the need to part with the spoils. It should be rather easy to see a parallel. Some societies, for whatever reason, achieved abnormally high levels of food production, posing a threat to their economy. For example, in the 1980s, the U.S. Department of Agriculture was saddled with mountains of surplus cheese, corn and other foods that it socked away in warehouses and even caves. Also, as recently as 2003, the USDA had to buy so much powdered milk to support dairy prices that beleaguered officials shipped same to U.S. ranchers for cattle feed. Having thus reached a position of great disadvantage, isn't it natural that they would look for ways of limiting their losses while ensuring that such calamities shall not occur again? What better way for ensuring the preceding than to discourage everyone else from following what they themselves did to land up with this problem of excess? As long as there is no excess with them, others can act as a buffer. One way it is good. It is better to limit the excess production with one state rather than each and every country producing in excess. Even assuming that all that is circulated about chemical fertilizers is true, there should be a way to continue its use in an acceptable manner. It is a known fact that, in the medical world, tolerance and resistance to a drug are of great relevance in deciding what medication to use. Also, the tendency to become stale after a certain interval of time is present in all styles or techniques, anywhere and everywhere. Why shouldn't this be extended to chemical fertilizers too? Use such fertilizers for some time, change thereafter to organic manure, and such cycles to go on repeating. Is child labour that bad? The case of child labour is very interesting. During school years, in the early 1960s, a large-scale mobilization of resources, of men, material, and related efforts was directed towards the national output, mainly of food production, in many countries of the world. We school children also were roped in, and to make our participation a pleasant experience, I think, regular lectures were conducted in school, extolling the virtues of all kinds of labour, mostly by some local expert in the field, and sometimes by a few visiting dignitaries from abroad. They all used to employ the examples of countries like USA, UK, France, etc., with emphasis put on the fact that school children in those countries do a lot of small jobs and errands, earn pocket money, and does not depend on their parents and guardians for normal expenses connected with their schooling. The state government, to help us in finding such profitable hobbies, even introduced formal training in extracurricular works for us, during which instructions one could study many of the interesting vocations like photography, metal polishing, clay modelling and others. In fact, the slogan in vogue, "Earn while you learn," was the chief proponent of this idea. Today, for whatever reason, the very same people who supported such ideas are turning hostile, especially to students, who do anything but their classwork. The old slogan, too, is being rechristened as child labour, to make it look more repugnant than it actually is. It should not be difficult to see a parallel. Some societies, for whatever reason, achieved certain fruits, and in that, what was of great help could have been the fact that those societies did direct the entire national wealth or effort towards growth, neglecting largely emotional issues and needs like child labour. It is a historical fact that quite a few of these efforts involved even eugenics, which again, are now frowned upon. Having thus reached a position of great vantage, it is natural that they would look for ways of preserving their envious status or sustaining their dominance. What better way exists for ensuring the preceding than to paint the fruits as totally unworthy? To doubly ensure this, they are declaring as inhumane, one of the primary reasons for their success, eugenics. Not only that, there is also total admiration showered on all those who continue with their traditions. There is no need, I think, to repeat that any fruit can be made to look good and inviting, or despicable and nauseating, by selecting words or expressions used for describing that, appropriately. Is privatization a bad word? Privatize or perish seems to be the slogan of the day. The general idea propagated by supporters of privatization is that infusion of efficiency and skill into the loss-making establishments is a certainty if governmental control is removed, turning the multitudes of loss-making concerns into asset creators. This has the potential to improve quality and competitive spirit while generating substantial levels of employment, two of the heaviest burdens of any state. Needless to say, this can result in greater or enhanced availability of monetary resources badly needed for the many and different governmental programs for the public good. Is it so? No, I think it is our idea about public sector loss, which needs a change. The losses caused to society by the public sector, instead of seen as a pecuniary loss, forcing us to ponder on ways of avoiding it, should rightly be viewed as the price society has to pay to ensure a healthy and competitive environment for industry and market. And this, aka perfect competition, is an essential requirement if the market or the private sector is to deliver the goods. In the absence of this loss-making public sector, there is nothing preventing the private sources in forming groups or cartels to promote self-interest, which in no case should be to promote the public good. Therefore, public sector losses should be seen as a small price we pay for our continued welfare. In fact, present questions regarding these losses wouldn't have been there had public sector been restricting itself to business areas or industries not conducive to the competitive environment. Thus, in its rightful domains, for example in such areas as those needing heavy investment, areas having no capacity to promise returns or places heavily restricted by some issues like security, the same sector would have been seen as a facilitator. Aren't we irrational then, in blaming the public sector for our woes? Chapter 9. A few more of my basic doubts. Why should we have political parties? The earlier days of democracy would have been great. The vast treasure of ancient literature pointing to unparalleled intellectual wealth. To note one thing we can deduce from the signs left by bygone eras. It is possible that there was a minuscule group of disgruntled elements who wanted to do something to harm the flourishing society like we find these days in all our endeavours. It looks like a few of them joined together and formed themselves into a group, calling themselves a party. And since that day democracy has never been the same. I think democracy as we follow leaves a lot to be desired is a well-known fact. There is no one who hasn't felt the incongruities of party democracy, I suppose, since improvements are being contemplated for the existing political system of governance in all democratic countries. Otherwise, what is the need to devote a lion's share of governmental efforts, not towards the activities of governance, but in bettering governance? But it has been so since the earliest days I can remember. I have attended scores of political meetings, where allocating resources for improving the existing system governance was cited as the most urgent need facing the nation, to justify additional taxes and other expenses. Nowadays also, this remains as a priority area for all governments. It seems we have not been able to improve our system of governance, or we failed in identifying the right cause for democracy's not being able to deliver the goods. In fact, it is the party or party politics that has destroyed the fundamental character of democracy, one that makes it self-governance, by unceremoniously negating the primary condition which would have ensured rational decision-making at all levels, that all who participate will do so according to their free will. The party system has converted democracy to a maker of qualified decisions. Not only that, it has reduced the function of opposition to one of always opposing the ruling side, a rather meaningless task. As a result of this, in cases where such decisions do not produce the desired effect or lead to a failure, rather than re-examining the decisions, the ruling side can always find an easy excuse, the opposition. The advantage of party politics is that no failure gets attributed to one party who can gloat in case of success. Another party can shoulder all failures with impunity while sharing the glory of success. What is happening to politicians? Politician bashing is a common sight of these days. Whether in West or East, irrespective of presidential, military or democratic dispensation, no country is free of this entertainment. Nowhere else can this be seen more clearly than in the violent and widespread objections to the continuation of a few privileges the politicians used to enjoy. Maybe as a result of this, politicians, in general, find the citizens not cooperating enough or disinterested with such an important task as governance. Consequently, they may also find the populace undeserving of a good, trouble-free life. A proposal to make voting an essential duty of all citizens, and more or less mandatory, seems to be in the offing. There are signs that a significant number of citizens do not feel that their concerns are being addressed by the mainstream parties or the political system. There are two main reasons for this. 1. From the citizens' side, they confuse government with politicians, which is because they are more easily identifiable with governance. And 2. From the politicians' side, they take the rather lighter responsibility of delivering governance, rather than thinking about governance in the abstract, their rightful job. This is because, unlike the past, the best of the generation do not opt for politics as a natural destination. This is giving rise to a layer of political dissatisfaction amongst members of the majority of people, the white working classes in some countries and the middle class in some other. An immediate reaction to this disengagement of a considerable part of the populace from playing their role as citizens further accentuates it. We need to recognize the role that the well-to-do, educated and empowered working majority, mostly white-collared, should be expected to play. Lower participation in formal democratic processes may not mean disengagement from all forms of politics. On the contrary, it should be seen as a warning to alter the political processes appropriately to enable the participation of the majority. There could be many methods to see that such a thing happens. rather than forcing a huge populace to tune themselves to certain archaic systems and procedures. This, of course, might entail a shift in our basic approach to governance. For example, many new opportunities exist to collate wants, opinions, or desires of a large population, if the capability of information technology is put to use. Also, appropriation of resources or other forms of wealth becomes a child's play, that too, with hardly any possibilities of dissatisfaction or mistake, in the face of the computing power made available by the digital revolution. Even the introduction of a new type of governance, real-time democracy, is possible if all citizens are connected to a central server directing the various elements of government, which is programmed to act on the input from citizens as connected, appropriately. Computer programs, in this case, shall be usurping the role of politicians who in turn can be making a graceful exit. Just as we saw earlier, how the growth of communication made the profession of commission agents redundant, the strides in IT have the potential to make whatever is left of politicians fade away. In the interim, quite sharp and rather unexpected reactions can be expected from all politicians, even to events that are not very noteworthy, and some of these, mostly from those who presently are in positions of power, would be of grave consequences. These are but the gasps of a dying profession. Is it advisable to whip members of legislature? Whip, in this context, is nothing but a survival tool for the democracy that is severely doped with party politics, a non-linearity introduced into the heart of the democratic processes of debates and discussions. In fact, in the absence of whip, there is nothing to prevent the legislative house from thinking rationally. Healthy debates and enlightening discussions can always lead to the best scenario or option. If this is the approach on all matters of great significance to the country's welfare, it is unfathomable why a democratic government should fail to meet expectations. The practice of democracy in the ancient world had been spotless. The vast treasure of Greek classics and the clean description of ancient governments show. Whip brings in rather substantial change. By severely constricting expressions of the spontaneity of the participants and their involvement, it relegates the heart of democracy, the debates, to a dull affair. Problems of democracy do not end there. We are quick to realize that our democratic institutions are not doing their job. Without second thoughts we proclaim, the below-par performance of our institutions is an honest reflection of the low quality of our representatives, the ones who constitute such institutions. That puts the ball in the people's court, the blame, of course, transferred to the ones who elected the representatives in the first place. People, it should be remembered, can only elect the best of the candidates, and therefore, we need to make whatever changes necessary to make people of caliber choose politics as a natural option. This part needs to be analysed further. Should we continue with whip? Discontinuing it will, also, as an icing on the cake, put an end to party politics. Of course, another way to exist, to escape from whip. If we make necessary changes to the rules of governance to stipulate that a government, once elected, will serve its full term of office, unless A. resigns or B. gets defeated by an explicit motion of no confidence, the whip shall become largely unnecessary. That such an act will make the parliamentary discussions and debates livelier as well as scholarly, and also will be attracting, naturally, the cream of the intelligentsia, are only the immediate benefits. Chapter 10. Some more of my doubts. Do we ever get fed up with our bad habits? Why is it that some facets of human behavior are free from theory of diminishing marginal utility, though this theory is the rule governing basic human conduct that can explain in full the process of deriving and enhancing satisfaction, and why such a phenomenon occurs, that too, exclusively in the realm of bad habits? I think one can safely say that we resort to various actions or activities to satisfy each of our needs, and a few among these happening to be termed as bad habits and a few others, the opposite, is only a temporal view which is susceptible to change. Shouldn't the pattern of deriving contentment be the same, whether we speak of good habits or the bad ones? Take our enjoyments. All of them come under the purview of this theory. We cannot continue with the same form of enjoyment for indefinite periods of time. If we like something, say, ice cream, the first cup of which provides us with 100 units of happiness, The next cup shall be able to provide only 80 units of happiness, next, even less, and so on till we get fed up of ice cream. The same is true in all matters of personal choice, mode of entertainment, habit or routine. For example, if we're in the habit of drinking tea every morning, we ourselves shall find an excuse for a change once in a while. But this does not seem to apply to anything we are hooked onto. Whether it is some habits like smoking, a chain smoker, drinking, a habitual drinker, reading, a voracious reader, or anything we enjoy in its extremes, the state of being fed up does not occur. Why? That brings us to the fundamentals of habits. Everything good we do is for meeting some demand, be it physical needs of the body or intellectual needs of the mind, or both. Some of these may also be termed as spiritual needs, whereas what we consider as bad habits does not fall within the above discussion. If bad habit was intended to satisfy a need, the reduction in marginal utility as discussed above would have taken place, bringing it to a natural stop. That doesn't happen. The very existence of elaborate and widespread arrangements for day addiction, which can be seen in all societies, is enough to prove this point. What then is a bad habit? What do bad habits do? Certainly, none of our needs is being satisfied by a bad habit. Bad habits, in fact, are only certain, mainly repetitive, activities that we continue to be busy with to prevent something else from occupying us. As the chosen activity does not satisfy any of the human needs, no cap occurs to its effectiveness due to diminishing marginal utility and can continue to block those inconvenient thoughts from occupying our minds. As mentioned earlier, avoidance of such thoughts is of paramount importance in maintaining a comfortable state of existence, especially for the male. The widely observed peculiarity, a greater incidence of bad habits among the male of our species, is a silent proof of this. This can now be explained easily. They have more of inconvenient thoughts to escape from. What can language do? Language is generally understood as a systematic means of communicating by the use of sounds or conventional symbols. We identify language as something that is closely linked with our life, its existence, consciousness, and bliss. We invoke language in all our affairs, whether to please or to nag, to applaud or to boo or to scold or to acclaim. No other human contraption is of greater avail than language. However, this is also a fact. Much of the disturbances, hatred, and violence, or other unpleasant happenings in our midst wouldn't have been there had our understanding of the language been different. Also, our history would have been free of many chapters recounting events of considerable hostility, hatred, pain, and suffering. Not to mention the good that would have resulted from aiming our effort towards something not so destructive. What, then, is a language for, if not for communication? As a first step towards an answer, assume there is no language. By language, I mean a structured system of symbols, with associated rules, grammar, etc. What handicap do we face? What we can't do? Easily we can see that it is possible to continue with almost all the functions served by languages using some other human capability. Like, for communicating ideas, sounds and actions can be of great help. In fact, even when we use language for communicating with others, it is the concurrent use of signs, actions, or expressions that ultimately result in conveying the exact meaning. This is true when it comes to expressing, showing or acknowledging emotions as well. Therefore, in the primary sphere of its present use, the absence of language need not pose an insurmountable problem. But we are at a loss when it comes to thinking. In the absence of a language, it becomes impossible to think, imagine or form a mental picture. Language thus can be identified more appropriately as the medium of thought. The above inference had also been reached earlier by many philosophers, a notable one being Dr. Susanne Langer, who in her books, An Introduction to Symbolic Logic and Philosophical Sketches, dwells deeply on the role of language as a representation of logic through symbols. In this book, the notable fact that in a sizable number of Nobel Prizes awarded so far, the research work leading to the invention or discovery was conducted using a particular language, German, has been specially mentioned. This is true even for Nobel Prize winners from countries other than Germany, like USA or UK, who conducted their research in attachment to the German chair of their respective institutions. The author attributes this to the capability of the language in forming new words, expressions, dependencies, and the interconnections with significant ease, challenging one constantly with fresh thoughts and ideas. We are in fact belittling language by terming it merely as a means of communication. By not selecting a language based on its appropriateness as a vehicle of thought and by selecting one based solely on the ease of communication, not only that we are losing whatever good that would have resulted from the involvement of a huge population with cognitive transactions, but also ceding possibilities of collisions and skirmishes, as individual preferences for communication need not be the same for all. Shouldn't we be more rational? What else can freedom of information do? I remember during my childhood days, the institutions or business concerns that commanded the greatest respect of society at large were the ones whose main thrust used to be in finding new markets for products as well as familiarizing a market with new products. In any gathering or assembly, if there were people who were employees of such concerns, commonly called commission agents, the attention they cornered used to be big enough to effectively render all other participants a non-entity. Reasons were very simple. It was the effort of these companies that enabled one to taste the best of things in life, like cheese from Australia, chocolates from Germany or tea from Assam, not to mention the multitude of articles from all over the globe, became a familiar object in other parts of the world thanks to these business houses. Almost every corner of the world, having the potential to contribute something special, the position held by these houses continued to remain significant, adding to the aura. But times changed. Better navigation, faster crafts, and ease of communication brought each of the producers as well as the consumers closer than ever before, making the role played by the commission agents a redundant one. Some of them continued to cling on to their business by helping people to find markets for a product as well as products for a market. But with the technological revolution which made both these tasks a child's play reinforcing their redundancy, it was inevitable that they leave the scene. Those who did not exit gracefully are bearing the brunt of public anger whenever anything untoward happens in the supply, distribution, or consumption of things in a society. Naturally, many questionable methods were also needed to be used by such people to remain in the reckoning, which involved either creating a fresh want or a fresh means of gratifying a want, where none existed. The ill effects of such random interventions in a market, notorious for its potential to cause instability in supply and demand, is always with us, causing economic upheavals at odd occasions. A parallel can be found in one of the most celebrated tools of empowerment for the common man, the right to information. In fact, right to information is relevant only when the information is sought by a person who is aggrieved directly as a consequence of whatever the information may refer to. In all other cases, the role played by the information seeker is quite similar to the one played by the commission agent we saw earlier. The relevance of information seeker, the third party, as far as information goes, is dependent on the outlook displayed by the society. In a progressive society, it can be gathered that people will either be capable of looking after their well-being or capable of learning to be so. In both these cases, there is no place for the presence of a third party with a right to information. The information revolution inevitably will result in them leaving the scene sooner or later, but now is the time to let people train themselves in making their own decisions. Not only that, it will enable a graceful exit for the right to information, RTI, activists, but also empowers each and every one of the populace by necessitating greater alertness and involvement in RTI sphere. Doubts may be expressed whether the comparison between the monetary gratification received by the commission agent and the information gratification amassed by the RTI activist can be considered as a proper one. It is, in fact, the RTI activist, by satisfying a superior need as described by Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, in reality ends up gratified much more than a mere commission agent, who by gathering certain wealth or other monetary benefits would have managed to gratify only certain basic, lower ones in the ordered grouping of needs. Here too, aren't we being irrational in encouraging the unchecked use of RTI?